Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Dejection, an Ode. It is a famous romantic poem by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. This ode was first published in the Daily Morning Post in the year 1802. However, he made several changes thereafter since it sounded to be a very personal poem. Therefore, after he made several changes to it, the poem was finally published in the year 1817 in its present version. In this poem, as the title suggests, he has elaborated upon hopelessness, dejection, and he has also talked about imagination in it. The mental and emotional state of dejection makes him emotionally paralyzed and he is unable to find his true creative self. So this poem about the loss of his creativity. The poem has also been compared with Wordsworth's Immortality Ode. This is a different stand that the poet is encountered with as compared to that of Wordsworth's, where he finds solace in the company of nature and is able to feel recompensed for every loss, whereas Coleridge does not feel the same. Wordsworth uses his dejection positively, but Coleridge finds his dejection rendering him unable to act. Therein comes the role of imagination for the poet, and he is able to find meaning in the exterior world with the help of his imagination. The ode is said to have been written to a lady. In the poem, the poet has addressed this lady several times. Now, let's begin with the text of the poem. So this begins with an epigraph which reads as, Late yestreen saw the new moon with the old moon in her arms, and I fear, my master dear, we shall have a deadly storm. So this is from the ballad of Sir Patrick Spens. So this poem begins with this epigraph from this ballad of Sir Patrick Spens, which is a very famous Scottish ballad. And since it's a ballad which are sung traditionally, its poet or its bard is anonymous. In this ballad, the speaker sees the moon in a certain appearance and sees an omen for a storm. That is a sign for a storm. This background Coleridge connects with the present, and in the first stanza, he tells the audience that if that speaker or the bard was weather-wise, that is, weather-wise is one who understands and predicts the weather well. So if the bard was weather-wise and the prediction of a storm was reliable, the poet also sees the same appearance of the moon as predicted, and thus says that the weather today, though seems to be calm, but wouldn't stay the same. So he begins. He says, well, if the bard was weather-wise, who made the grand old ballad of Sir Patrick Spens, this night, so tranquil now, will not go hence, unroused by winds that ply a busier trade than those which mould yon cloud in lazy flakes, or the dull sobbing draught that moans and rakes upon the string of this Aeolian lute, which better far were mute. So the poet sees the omens and predicts a storm that this evening won't pass undisturbed by winds that form the clouds on the horizon, or that appears to be crying as they play the Aeolian lute or the harp of air. So lute is a stringed musical instrument and Aeolian is related to the wind. So we can assume it to be a harp-like instrument. So he wishes it were better if that musical instrument remained mute or silent. The poet further addresses the listener and talks about the weather and the surroundings and finds that the wintry new moon is covered with the phantom light, that is, some ghostly appearance, and at the same time it also has the opposite aspect, that is a silver lining. That also he finds there. So this goes as, for lo, the new moon, winter bright, and overspread with phantom light. With swimming phantom light overspread, but rimmed and circled by a silver thread. I see the old moon in her lap, foretelling the coming on of rain and squally blast. And oh, that even now the gusts were swelling, and the slant night shower driving loud and fast. So the poet also finds the replication of the scene from the ballad of Sir Patrick Spens, that the old moon is sitting in the lap of the new moon, which presages a squally blast or the coming of a heavy storm. So this her lap is the new moon's lap, and the squally blast is the storm. He exclaims and wishes for the storm to have already begun and the rain to come loud and fast. In the next lines, we see that this wish to crush the prevailing scene with the storm but heavy rain is because the poet finds himself in a state of numbness induced by the dejection of spirit. He finds that these sounds of storm and rains often have raised his seated spirit and made him either anxious or thrilled, and have sent him into strange new spirits. So he wants to be induced with the new spirits and do away with the dejected mood. This storm that he wishes for might startle the dull pain and might inspire him to be more alive than he really is at the moment. Those sounds which oft have raised me while they awed and sent my soul abroad might now perhaps their wonted impulse give, might startle this dull pain and make it move and live. In the next stanza, The poet describes many different scenes from the surroundings with great vividity and beautifully painted word imagery. This stanza reminds us of the Immortality Ode by William Wordsworth, where he also gives us pictures of natural surroundings. A grief without a pang, void, dark and drear. A stifled, drowsy, unimpassioned grief, which finds no natural outlet, no relief. In word or sigh or tear. So, the poet feels a grief without a pang of pain, without a spasm of pain. It is void or blank, dark and drear, that is gloomy. It is some kind of choked, sleepy and unimpassioned or devoid of any emotional feeling, which doesn't go off by talking or about it or by sighing or by crying over it. So it does not go away if you just cry over it. Nothing seems to give relief to the poet. And now we find a possible reason for the pain-stricken or dejected state of the poet in the coming lines. He addresses the lady of her thoughts and speaks about what he perceives in the nature and what impact does it have on him. He says, "O lady, in this wan and heartless mood, to other thoughts by yonder throstle wooed, all this long eve so balmy and serene, have I been gazing on the western sky and its peculiar tint of yellow-green, and still I gaze, and with how blank an eye." He speaks that in his mental void and despair, he has been driven away by the song of the little bird. He has been looking to the balmy or pleasant and calm western sky, which is peculiarly or strangely in the color of yellowish green the whole evening. He still is trying to look into that sky, but now it has no vision, and he feels that it is a blank eye. Hereafter, he describes the presence and movement of the clouds, which at times seem to be the movement of the stars, which are behind them. He refers to the twinkling of the stars, which makes them constantly visible at this time. And then the moon is described as a beautiful entity which is coming out of her cloudless and starless lake of blue sky. So in the coming lines, he has described all this, which read as, "And those thin clouds above, in flakes and bars, that give away their motion to the stars. Those stars that glide behind them or between, now sparkling, now bedimmed, but always seen. Yon crescent moon, as fixed as if it grew in its own cloudless, starless lake of blue." So all these have a peculiar beauty and are excellently fair. Yet the poet concludes the second stanza with the line that he is able to see the beauty, but he is not able to feel the beauty of these objects. It is the same as of Wordsworth, where Wordsworth mentions that things are the same, but a celestial light, which was like the glory of the dream, is missing from every object. "I see them all excellently fair. I see, not feel, how beautiful they are." So finding no relief in the beauteous forms of nature, Coleridge further ponders that if at all he has to get some relief from his dejected spirits, it would not come from outside, and that this relief has to come from within. So, he starts the next stanza thus. My genial spirits fail, and what can these avail? To lift the smothering weight from off my breast. It were a vain endeavour, though I should gaze forever on that green light that lingers in the west. So he says, his genial spirits, that is, his amicable or cordial spirits, fail him. That is, his ability to feel beauty in these beautiful scenes is not serving any purpose, because these objects of beauty are not able to lift the smothering weight, that is, the overwhelming burden away from his heart. If he should continue to gaze towards the green light in the western sky forever, it would be a vain endeavor. That is, it would be a futile effort. I may not hope from outward forms to win the passion and the life whose fountains are within. That he can never hope to find the passion and the life that he is looking for in these external forms, since the life and those passions find their sources from within of a man's heart and spirit, and not in the external things. Here we can see that the forms that give Wordsworth solace and relief are not able to give Coleridge any comfort. So here, even nature fails to provide any relief to Coleridge, which is actually a healer for Wordsworth. The poet Coleridge, in the fourth stanza, describes his own philosophy of the human and psychological world and its connection to the outside world and nature. In a way, it seems to be a response to Wordsworth's vision of the same aspects, whereas Wordsworth finds the outside nature soothing or relieving. Coleridge finds it ineffective and speaks of the soul force or the inner force to be that strong to create a ray of hope and not nature only. Addressing the lady of his thoughts, he speaks, O lady, we receive but what we give, and in our life alone does nature live. Ours is her wedding garment, ours her shroud. And would we aught behold of higher worth than that inanimate cold world allowed to the poor, loveless, ever anxious crowd? Ah, from the soul itself must issue forth a light, a glory, a fair, luminous cloud, enveloping the earth, and from the soul itself must there be sent a sweet and potent voice of its own birth, of all sweet sounds, the life and element. So here he says that we only receive what we give, or what we give, what we receive. And what we give is what we already have inside us. The outside world reflects onto us with our own mental states. We find meaning outside if we have it inside us already. Then the line that he says, ours is her wedding garment, ours her shroud, is that if we look at nature with a festive and celebrating mood, we find celebration in nature. And if our mood is of mourning, or if our mood is sorrowful, the nature would mourn with us. It would also cry with us. He elaborates the pragmatic observation that if we wish to observe more than the harsh reality of the worldly existence, wherein the chilly world deals with the isolated, loveless, anxious people, we have to take command of our own souls and issue a ray of light, which is sweet and potent enough to envelope the whole earth like a cloud of light. Thus, for Coleridge, every beauty in everything comes from the power of the soul that looks for it. Thus, for him, nature is a reflection of our own self, and it cannot change you until your within or your inner self changes you. We can say that the storm and the dark sky in the beginning are a kind of external representation of the poet's own internal feelings. Now, in the fifth stanza, Coleridge shifts his focus from the outside nature onto the psychological realm, wherein he finds a greater power and tries to take a command of the mental states. He finds and describes joy as the supreme mental state in the coming lines. So, addressing the lady, he speaks, "O pure of heart, thou need not ask of me what this strong music in the soul may be, what and wherein it doth exist, this light, this glory, this fair, luminous mist, this beautiful and beauty-making power." So he calls this lady now, "O good-hearted lady, you need not ask me what that music in the soul is and where from it comes. That is, what is the source of this soulful music? This music is the light, the shine, and the shining mist is the most beautiful thing which inspires all beauty in all things." In the next lines, he says that this beautiful and beauty-inspiring music or the misty light is joy, as Coleridge describes it to the lady. Joy is given only to the purest in their purest of moments. Pure here implies to the purity of spirit or the purity of soul. Coleridge here gives one of his best parallels to this, that joy is both the life and life's flow, as it is both the cloud and the rain. So he says, "Joy, virtuous lady, joy that never was given, save to the pure and in their purest hour. Life and life's effluence, cloud at once and shower. Joy, lady, is the spirit and the power which wedding nature to us gives in dower." So for Coleridge, joy is like a spirit and a power that we gift to ourselves. So the dower is the gift, as a dower or a wedding present when we marry ourselves to nature. And after this wedding with nature, a whole new set of heaven and a new earth is created, which is beyond the dreams of the people messed up in sensual pleasures or egos. So he says, a new earth and new heaven, undreamt of by the sensual and the proud. In the next lines, he conveys that for him, joy is the sweet voice or the lovely luminous cloud surrounding the earth. All this comes from within for our own rejoicing. And then from within flows a river of joy towards the outside external world of all objects. And then only everything belonging to the world of eye and ear echoes of the same joyfulness that propels from within of our heart, and all colors of light seem to be suffused with the same color of our mind. So he says, joy is the sweet voice, joy the luminous cloud. We in ourselves rejoice. And thence flows all that charms or ear or sight, all melodies, the echoes of that voice, all colors, a suffusion from that light. Thus, having pondered about the mental state of joy in form of an all-permeating, radiating soul force, Coleridge turns towards his own self and its present states, wherein he explores what he was once and how he has come to be what he is now, that is a dejected mind. So there was a time when, though my path was rough, this joy within me dallied with distress, and all misfortunes were but as the stuff whence fancy made me dreams of happiness. For hope grew round me like the twining vine, and fruits and foliage, not my own, seemed mine. So, back in the past, he had a rough path. That is, he had struggles of life. But the then existent joy inside made his rough path smooth. So the joy was able to make him feel even the rough paths smooth. All his misfortunes were just like a stuff from which he could easily create his happiness with his fancy. That is his imaginative faculty of mind. This helped him feel so. It was so because he could find hope as a resort, which kept him optimistic. As he says, hope was there as a vine, which made him feel that he had all the fruits, flowers, and foliage needed for his future. The poet now finds himself in a state where he is bowed down and burdened. He says, but now afflictions bow me down to earth, nor care I that they rob me of my mirth. But oh, each visitation suspends what nature gave me at my birth, my shaping spirit of imagination. So the poet doesn't care if these burdens rob him of his mirth. That is, if these burdens steal his happiness, he doesn't care of all this. He is grief-stricken because these visitations or these strokes of dejection, they all take away his inherent creative power of imagination with which he shapes the world. So he feels very intensely that the loss of creativity in himself. Further, the poet feels the stress of the feeling that he is helpless about. He says he must be quiet and patient about such feelings. This was the only plan he had in mind to deal with the situation. But instead, he finds that the dejection that he allowed to infect a part of his now has spread into the whole of his existence, and it has made his whole dull and painful, made him dull and painful. It has become a rotten hole infected with that infection of dejection. He says, "For not to think of what I needs must feel, but to be still and patient all I can." That is, he feels helpless. "And happily by abstruse research to steal from my own nature all the natural man. This was my sole source, my only plan, till that which suits a part infects the whole, and now is almost grown the habit of my soul." So the dejection has become a habit of his soul, which earlier was not there. Now in the coming stanza, he changes the tone, and moving on to a different idea, he describes the internal conditions through the external scenes, and then signifies the internal through the external conditions. So this stanza marks the rendering of the polar effect of fixities, where the poet effectually depicts the chaos and dilemma of his being. Here, Coleridge commands the viper or snake like poisonous thoughts. So, viper-like or snake-like that spread poison. So, he has poisonous thoughts. He wants them to go away. They are like a real nightmare. He runs away from them and listens to the music of the wind, which was howling in the background, hitherto unheeded. Still, yet they were unheeded. So, he says, "Hence, viper thoughts that coil around my mind, reality's dark dream," that is nightmare. "I turn from you and listen to the wind, which long has raved unnoticed." Further he says, "What a scream of agony by torture lengthened out that lute sent forth." So in the next lines he says, "Thou wind that race without, bare crag or mountain tan or blasted tree, or pine grove whither woodman never clomb, or lonely house long held the witch's home." So Coleridge, he explains the aspects and perspectives of the wind now. He says that this wind, like a harp, makes the music of torture and agony. So that musical instrument is mostly played for the sorrowful songs or for the dirges. This wind raves outside the bare crags, mountain lakes or weather-torn trees, and among the pine trees woodmen never has set foot on, or in the houses which are said to be haunted by witches for long times. They have not stepped into them. The poet thinks any of these is a fitter instrument than the harp that he himself is playing. Here he and the wind are the two musicians. Methinks were fitter instruments for thee, mad lutenist, who in this month of showers, of dark brown gardens and of peeping flowers, makes devil's yule with worse than wintry song, the blossoms, buds, and timorous leaves among. So he calls it a mad lutenist. The other mad lutenist is the wind. In the season of rains, when from the mud everywhere flowers have started peeping, seems to throw a devil's Yule or a devil's Christmas celebration. So this sounds worse than the wintry song among the vegetation. Now in the coming lines, he refers to the wind as an actor who is perfect in tragic performance, as a mighty poet who is crazy. So the wind is both an actor and a crazy poet for Coleridge. In his craze, he seems to be telling a story of a host or an army which has forced a rout or a defeat. The soldiers are dejected, groaning with pain of defeat and of wounds, and shivering in cold and hopelessness. So, he puts these into these rhyming lines as, "Thou actor, perfect in all tragic sounds, thou mighty poet, even to frenzy bold, what tells thou now about? It's of the rushing of a host in rout, with groans of trampled men with smarting wounds. At once they groan with pain and shudder with the cold." So thus we are given so vivid pictures of the surroundings that replicate the inner being of the poet, and we witness a chaotic world which Coleridge finds himself in and inside himself too. Thereafter, in the next lines, suddenly he becomes aware of the change. And in these lines, he finds that all this has stopped and there is silence, an utter deepest silence. All the rushing of wind and crowd, all the groaning and crying of soldiers due to wound and everything, all the shuddering and noise have stopped. All that is over now. So he says, "But hush, there is a pause of deepest silence, and all that noise as of a rushing crowd, with groans and tremulous shudderings, all is over." So the poet has arrived at a stage where the storm of the beginning that he so intensely wished for is over now. It has impacted the spirit of the poet and caused the desired or longed for disturbance. And now, after the destruction, it starts creating the hope of new being. So he was waiting for this destruction for stimulating his own dull spirits. It tells a different story to the poet now. It is a tale with less fear and more of delight. This could be compared to Otway's Tender Songs, a story of a little child lost in wilderness, not far but away from home. This child is moaning in grief and fear, and at times screams high so as to make her mother hear, with a hope that she would find her. He states this story now as, "It tells another tale with sounds less deep and loud, a tale of less affright, and tempered with delight, as Otway's self had framed the tender lay. It is of a little child upon a lonesome wild, nor far from home, but she hath lost her way, and now moans low in bitter grief and fear, and now screams loud and hopes to make her mother hear." Thus, towards the end of the 7th stanza, Coleridge tells us that after the tremulous effects of the storm, he is out of that dejection, or the spirit of dejection, the dull spirit. He is out of it now, but lives as a child who is lost, but has a hope for her home. In the 8th and the last stanza of the poem, Coleridge, in pursuance of his belief that all the joy and the spirit are to be summoned from within, and then only we can find the joy in nature and the world, expresses all that he has talked about in terms of the lady of his thoughts. He suffuses all his genial spirits and blessings and his wishes in form of words dedicated to that lady who dominates his mind and soul. So he says, "It is midnight, but small thoughts have I of sleep. Full seldom may my friend such vigils keep. Visit her gentle sleep with wings of healing, and may this storm be but a mountain birth. May all the stars hang bright above her dwelling, silent as though they watched the sleeping earth." So it is midnight now, and the poet has no intent to sleep. And he wishes his lady not to have such sleepless nights or vigils. He prays sleep to give her kind and healing visits to that lady, and says, "May this storm be a birth of something new, and all the stars may shine peacefully above her house as though they shone over the dreaming earth." Further, his shower of wishes continue on the lady, and in the next lines he says that she may wake up light-hearted, full of imaginings and cheer in her eyes, and wishes that may joy uplift her spirits and her voice may echo her spirits. With light heart may she arise, gay fancy, cheerful eyes. Joy lift her spirit, joy attune her voice. To her may all things live from pole to pole, their life the eddying of her living soul. So now, continuing his wishes for the lady, he adds to it that the whole earth, from the north to the south pole, must become alive for her. And the life on the earth must be eddying, that is, it must circle with her life, or they should cover her life, and may they float together. Thus, Coleridge ends his poem with the lines of a divine wish for the lady, divine choice, and a submission as well that, "O simple spirit, guided from above, dear lady, friend devotest of my choice, thus may thou evermore rejoice." So the lady he has been talking about is a simple spirit, guided from above, that is, guided from heavens. She is a dear friend to Coleridge, and she is a friend of his choice, and he wishes her joy and rejoicing in her life forever. Thus, we see that Coleridge, who has submitted his spirits to a lady, was rejected in that, finally finds solace in form of genial feelings about the lady. He is convinced that the inner happiness can only lead. This state can only be countered with the identification of joy of spirit, and in order to identify that joy, he deliberates with his imagination. All these mechanisms in the end up in supporting his belief system of the relationship of man with nature. This relationship as Coleridge explains it, is in striking contrast with the beliefs of Wordsworth. Here, it would not be unnecessary to mention that the lady mentioned so intensely in the poem is Sarah Hutchinson. She was the younger sister of Mary Hutchinson, Wordsworth's wife. So here, the lecture ends. Thank you for watching.